Reactive training systems.
I've been thinking about doing this update for years, you know, and just haven't got around to it because, frankly, it's a ton of work. But the thing that motivated me to finally push the button is this injury kind of from the last competition, and I think it has to do with letting a certain type of spinal loading get more stress than it probably should have gotten. And I wasn't, I mean, I was doing what most coaches do, and you just kind of eyeball it and you go, well, that seems okay. But I wasn't actually doing the math on it. I wasn't like being diligent about my calculations with it, because it's too much. It's too much to do by hand, you know. So,
well, you were also leading up to an important meet, which is the other consideration. It's like, how much do you want to change your system of training prior to an important meet? And maybe it's good if we kind of backtrack a little bit and talk about that. So like, we should talk about the blocks leading into the meet, some of the cool learning opportunities that you had, and some of the things that you were wrestling with in your head a bit. So one of the things that I think about is you came off of your first meet back last year, riding high, outstanding meet, like way better than you were expecting it to go. And then after that, you tried a new strategy, which you've deemed capacitor, which you talk about in the training lab. You wrote an article about it, and you saw huge improvements after that as well in your training. And that's kind of led you down a road to think about training a little bit differently. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
That changed, the introduction of that strategy was more unidirectional than what I had been writing training as for a while. And what I mean by that is each block had a little bit more of a singular focus, So we do what, most powerlifters do these days is we write training in a fairly complex way as a loading style, meaning that you have all the different components of training co-located in the same training block, So you'll have some things that are geared more toward hypertrophy, some things that are geared more toward skill development or strength, or all the different things that you think are important. They're all there. Now, we did use, I guess, kind of a bridge between these two concepts. Like on one end, you have complex, where you've got kind of everything thrown together in the same block. And on the other end, you have unidirectional, which is just a block that's focused on just one quality. In the middle, you have a concept from Charlie Francis called vertical integration, which says, take everything, have it all together in the same block, but change the relative dosing of it based on what your emphasis item is. So maybe you're doing a hypertrophy block, and you'll have relatively more slots devoted to hypertrophy and relatively fewer slots devoted to skill development and other things. So that can change from one block to the next. So that really highlights the way that this can be a spectrum. And I would say that we were more on the side of a complex loading style. And then, like you said, we had the comp that I did last year. And then in the aftermath of that, I tried something that was just a little bit more unidirectional, or quite a bit more unidirectional, but still like not an extreme version, right? And that went really, really well. So also around that time is when we moved. We moved from Wyoming to Washington. So packed up the family, the kids, and everything, and moved up to Washington. So that was fairly disruptive. But like during this time, I'm still coaching and kind of continuing my experiments in that way, and training on the road and everything. And when I started up my own training again in the summer, was kind of late summer is when those disruptions started to die down. Kind of picked back up with that same sort of thing more of this unidirectional sort of paradigm. And it went pretty well. I would say maybe cutting to the chase a little bit. Kind of where I've landed with it is I might have swung a bit too far in the unidirectional direction, and I've kind of gone back toward the. I don't know. I'd say where I'm at currently is in between where we used to be, say in 2021, and where I was in say summer of 2022. So neither one of those were really extreme positions, but I'm even between those two at this point. So very middle of the road programming style, I guess. But that's kind of where I'm at currently. But especially if I look at the bench performance from this last competition that I did, I would say the unidirectional style does seem to be working. It's just slow, steady, which is fine, especially you've been training for 25 years or something. But slow and steady is fine.
So after the move, I remember us chatting about you kind of getting yourself set up, training again, setting up the blocks, and definitely having more of a focus on unidirectional loading. Like you're trying to specifically focus on one quality, one block characteristic or trait, and then sequencing that leading into the meet. And I remember you experiencing like a couple of setbacks with your back, a little bit of pain there. How did that manifest? Like what did that look like, and how did you work through that into the last comp prior to nationals?
I mean, maybe it's a memory issue, but I don't think it was bugging me too much through like late 2022, so late last year. But somewhere toward the very end of last year and the beginning of this year, I did start to have more hiccups, more hangups with it. And I wonder to what extent the unidirectional style kind of caused some of it. So I also competed in November. After that competition, took the normal amount of time off after competing, and I knew that I was getting ready for this comp in February, and built the blocks how I normally would. And I know how long it takes me to normally do my skill acquisition work and stuff like that. So I had some time to do a more capacitor style kind of early stage that's fairly non-specific, and that did seem to be super helpful in the times that I've tried it since then. So that's what I set up in that kind of December timeframe, and that went well. I kind of finished up, spent most of December feeling pretty good, and then when I started kind of the comp prep stage where we were really getting back into competition lifts. I mean, not that they were non-existent, but they definitely got, heavier and, a bit more focused, I might say. That started the beginning of this year. And when that started, I did struggle. I was struggling to get some momentum going. And then it seemed like I was starting to get some momentum going, and then my back started acting up on me again. So that is part of why I'm thinking of kind of tilting back toward the complex style loading too, is to just not get so far away from that, or not get as far away from that. I mean, time will tell like how fruitful that strategy is, because you do have to take some risks in training, and if you don't take any risks, then you're not going to get anywhere. But we'll see how it pans out. But that's kind of when I started having more back issues again. And it started out being more of a nuisance than anything, and it's different than it was before the competition break. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna jump in and say, I remember us chatting, and you were saying that it's like, yeah, you had a hiccup in training, felt something kind of in the hip, in the back area, and you made some modifications, you worked around it, but the block itself wasn't really reworked. It was just more like, how do I do this block the way that I wrote it? And I remember that that then led basically into the peaking block here, leading into nationals. And that's when things really started to get problematic with the back. So I was wondering if maybe we could get into that a little bit, because that was, I mean, if you're listening to this, you know the outcome, you know what happened, you know that Mike had a fantastic performance. But I do think that it's important to debrief a little bit. It's essentially what we're doing here, is debriefing on like what that was like, that moment when you're leading into the meet, you're like a week, 2 weeks out, and you're going, yeah, I don't know if I can compete. So
Sure.
I was curious if we could get into that a little bit and what that was like for you.
I had kind of the nuisance back stuff going on for most of the peaking block that was nuisance enough to prevent me from kind of hitting the higher end training weights that you'd usually want to see, but I was able to do most of my accessory stuff and kind of keep all that stuff moving. And I was able to bench as normal. Then we got, I think it was around 10 days out from the competition. I actually had a good squat workout. It was like finally had a good squat workout, and try the deadlift the next day, and had the same sort of back pain that I had been having, but just way worse. And, had to cut the session, take a max dose of ibuprofen for a few days after that. Could barely get my socks on the next day, kind of thing. So I wasn't as bad as some people get it, right? Some people are bedridden. I wasn't that bad, but I definitely wasn't training. It was definitely not like, oh, maybe you can work through it. Nope, definitely not working through this one. So took a couple days off there, and sent you a message on my way home from the gym that was like, that's it. I'm out. I've had it. I'm tired of dealing with this, and I'm gonna probably have to withdraw. So that, I would say, is like, that was the biggest, kind of in the moment experience, was that sort of feeling of like, I don't even want to do this anymore, but the advice you gave to me, which is really brilliant advice regardless of the situation, was just like, well, just wait and see. Keep doing the best that you can do, one step at a time. But you don't get anything extra for withdrawing early. You can wait and see. And, if it's not working out, then it's not working out. But you don't have to decide until, right before weigh-ins if you want. You can wait till the very last minute, and that's fine. It's kind of goes back to a principle of, when in doubt, develop the situation and just see how things go, So that's what we did. I took, 2 days, I think, off of lower body training. Did what I could on the upper body side, and then after those 2 days, pretty much continued with my taper on the upper body side. On the lower body side, it was kind of the other direction. Started with, squats and deadlifts, just one plate. And I did like one set of 5 reps or something like that for squats and deadlifts that first day. And was really nervous about doing it too. It's all the same stuff that most people feel when they're coming back from an injury, just kind of the trepidation where you're over bracing and all that stuff too. It's one plate. It's your very first warm up set, and you're bracing like it's a max effort. It's just, you're afraid of re-injuring the area. And that's definitely where I was at. In that time, I did do a couple sets of belt squats because that was something I could do. And, I'm thinking, if this works, I'm still going to have to perform. So I don't want to just totally stop doing any sort of leg training whatsoever. I've got to do what I can. So belt squats it was, and So I got some training in. But then we ended up pretty much just adding a plate a day for several days. Now the reason for plate a day, which by the way is way more aggressive than I would normally do. It's way more aggressive than I would recommend or anything like that. But it was.
It's super fast.
We got lucky that it worked, and that's fine. Sometimes you need some luck, but I don't want to make it sound like it was just some brilliant rehab plan. What it was is I had some numbers that I wasn't willing to go below. I didn't want to open my squat below 300. I didn't want to open my deadlift below 320. And normally, for most people, I would say it's not a good idea to have numbers like that, but I know when I was talking to you, John, you were kind of saying something very similar. I think that just take what you can get, which is, I think it is a fine suggestion in almost all conditions. My feeling at that moment though was just look, I've done the thing where I go and, open with 50% of my 1RM or something like that. And you wave to the crowd. It's clearly is something wrong? Yeah, something's wrong. But, I had done all that before. And so for me, if I wasn't going to be able to do my minimum numbers, then I would just rather not do it and get on with the rehab process in maybe a more sensible way. So I said, well, if I want to open with 300 in the squat, for example, and I'm, 9 days out or whatever it was, then how quickly do I have to go? And this is just kind of what it worked out to be. So I kind of built those plans that way and added plate a day for a while. And I got them kind of staggered. I forget exactly how that happened, but it ended up the deadlift was like a plate ahead of the squat, which works out for my strength level. But yeah, ramped up to 600 pounds. And then had a travel day. And then it would have been 48 hours prior to competing. Worked up to my last warm-ups. And that's kind of when we knew that, it was all pretty up in the air until that point. And then when I was able to do my last warm-ups and didn't have any pain, didn't have any sort of issue, that's when we knew this is probably going to work.
Yeah, it's a great case study of being able to reserve the right to make the decision at a later point. And I remember back in 2021, you and I were in a similar position for me, and you said the same words to me, which is where I got it from. So really, you're just super smart. So there's that. But, I remember it was 8 days out, and I had taken an equipped squat, and I walked it out, completed it, and then had an issue where it rolled off my back and was catching the back of the suit. So I had to let go. And when I let go with, considerably more than my raw max, it sent me, flying forward, in which I hit a bench in front of me. So I've learned that lesson. Don't put anything in front of me. The end result was my back was pretty darn flared up. And I remember reaching out to you saying Mike, I don't know if this is going to happen. I mean, I could probably go in, and I had some eyes on a bench number that I wanted to get in a shirt. It was my first time, and, really wanted to give it a go. I was like, but yeah, I don't know if I'm going to be able to squat and deadlift. And your advice was the same thing. Well, let's see what happens. There's a long time between now and the meet. Let's develop the situation. Now I remember 2 days out from the meet saying the same thing to you that you did here, which was Mike, in order for me to compete, I've got to work up to at least my top raw set before I put, the suit on. And even before I put knee wraps on, I've got to be able to work up to that raw, because that's going to be the determinant. If I can't do that, then I can't squat on Sunday. And I remember, checking in with you being green light, we're good. I hit the raw number. We're set. And honestly, now I can put on the suit and I feel good. And I had a very good performance that day. I had to be very cautious. The deadlift really wasn't there on the day of the meet, but I was able to squat a really good number, bench a really good number. I was very proud of my performance. And I look at the
Yeah.
parallel between that situation and yours, and it's very similar, right? Like, you didn't take everything you had on deadlift, and that was good. That was good that you didn't, but you took a good number. You built a really good total, and you had an amazing day. So I'm curious, like, transitioning to that, what I'm curious, like, what your mindset was like 48 hours out, and then, like, right after the meet, what was the change in your thought
Well,
process, your demeanor, your expectation at that point?
mental games are so funny because, like, what I said to everyone who asked me, you know, when you're standing around at a competition, everybody asks you, how you feeling? You know, that's the classic, you know, and kind of the response I kept saying over and over was like, I don't know, we'll see. Hopefully it's good enough to try, you know. And I was trying to maintain that attitude where I didn't want to overcommit mentally to do something that was going to be not a great idea. You know, I don't have a problem with like stepping up to the bar. It's where I think I might have an issue would be, especially in a competition setting, is to put a weight on the bar that is probably not in your best long-term interests, you know, especially in a situation like this. So it was kind of a hedge against that sort of thing.
Well, I was going to say, I remember us talking about that, and keeping,
Yeah.
you know, the number one goal is to keep you healthy. Like, the last thing that you wanted to do was compete
Right.
and be in a situation where that sets you back 6 months or something, right? Like, that's not fun for anybody. Coming back to just competing again after your 6-year layover, like, that's not something you want. You want to be building momentum. You want to be able to go from meet to meet and learn and grow and obviously get stronger, execute better, perform well on the day. And so, yeah, that being the number one thing is like, yeah, let's see how it goes. Let's put the load on the bar. Let's feel it out. And let's not even take it if we think that there's going to be something there that's going to set you back. And I think that you did a really good job of like assessing that. And I think that creating that like benchmark for yourself 48 hours out to say, if I can't work up to this, then I know it's just not even worth it. It's not worth it to me, like, mentally, emotionally, to show up and throw the singlet on. You know, it's not worth it because I know that I've done this before. I don't want to be myself in 2016 where, you know, I'm going into Raw Nationals feeling like I can't give 100%. Like, that doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good to the athlete, Mike Tuchscherer, you know? And then there's the other component of it of, I don't want to load something on the bar that I know that is going to set me back in terms of injury. So I think that 48-hour gut check was really important.
It was important.
It was pivotal
for me,
in my opinion,
to have the confidence. I mean, even as it ended up, like, last warm-ups, you know, typically is like 82 to 85% of 1RM. And to say, okay, you know, low to mid 80s is okay. Let's go to 100 48 hours later. That's a pretty aggressive jump. And I was really nervous about that. But I would probably have not even, I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't done that prior. That would have been a really different situation mentally. I want to mention too, just while we're talking about weird mental gymnastics. So for me, I've been tracking velocity for, and I've got a lot of velocity data. So working up to these last warm-ups, the other thing for me to check was just relative strength levels. Like, had my strength changed very much as a result of the injury / non-taper / the weird situation? Am I still going to be capable of doing the things that I want to do? So I was looking at the velocity, and I've kind of got a reference range, you know, that I know what's normal for these weights. I know what they normally move between this speed and that speed. And I worked up to those last warm-ups and checked the velocity, and it was 0.01 meters per second below the reference range. So ever so slightly too slow. One might even say within the margin of error of the device, you know. But still, I looked at that number and I go, and I kind of checked myself after that, because it's like, dude, you were just injured and didn't think you were going to do this at all. And then you kind of basically haven't trained in almost 2 weeks. And now, you're ever so slightly imperceptibly below the reference range in terms of speed on the last warm up. And you're disappointed with that. Like, well, yeah, I mean, I'm supposed to get stronger just by magic, right? Like, why do I have to train? Yeah.
I think about it, therefore I got stronger. Well, but like also too, to credit you, like some people might look and say a criticism of Mike Tuchscherer is that he tracks way too much. And, that by tracking everything, you take away from the process and the fun of it or whatever else, right? But to your credit, the ability for you to track all of those data points allowed you to pay attention to a signal. And the signal was, hey, Mike, you might be able to open with a number that you feel is normal. And like that's a really good sign. Similar to the example that I gave of like, if I can't work up to this number, I have no business putting on something that's going to allow me to handle way more than my raw max, and I think that that's a really good thing that you were taking advantage of bar velocity, that you were paying attention to that because it was a leading indicator, right? Like that's one of the things that I think about is leading indicators in training. Like a leading indicator sometimes could be this accessory movement, or the way we would like to talk about it, a preparatory exercise is moving. If we see this preparatory exercise moving, sometimes the lagging indicator is the comp lift. The comp lift will actually go up a few weeks later. I know that's true for me on feet up bench. If my feet up bench starts moving, comp bench is right about to move. Sometimes I just need to be steady and hold steady with it. For you, you saw the bar velocity move at that last session and it showed you, hey, Mike, you're probably good to open in a number that you feel normal with. So that brings me to the question that I want to ask you. What was it like preparing your openers? Like, how did you prepare your game day plan? Like, were you like, hey, here's the number that you want? Or were you like, I'm going to open here and figure it out as I go?
Figure it out as we go sort of approach, which incidentally we did before at the first, comeback competition almost a year ago. That was similar in that we didn't know with much precision what the top end would be, but I had taken a weight and said, it looks about like an opener. So if we're going to open with that, what would that normally look like? What does a top end have to be in order for this to be an opener? And, kind of just work the plan from that direction. I did something very similar this time, and we did it with the knowledge of like, we don't really know that top end is going to be there. We think the raw strength probably is, but you don't know what roadblocks you might hit along the way. Now, the interesting philosophical point to this is that is always true. It's just that in a normal non-injured scenario, you can kind of convince yourself that all the relevant details and that you're not going to run into anything unexpected. You shouldn't run into anything unexpected. Otherwise you would be expecting it. It's just that it's a little bit more obvious that you're dealing with the unknown in a post-injury sort of scenario, but it's always true. So yeah.
In preparing for any meet, that's the case, right? Like I want to highlight that point for a second. You assume that the training that you did made you stronger leading into the meet. You assume that after your taper, whatever your taper looks like, whatever method, that on the day of the meet, you will have more than you did in the training leading up to the meet, that you will have either gotten linearly stronger or fatigue has dissipated, therefore your performance will be up. We all assume that. Sometimes that's true, sometimes it's not. What was tricky about this situation is it's easier to wrap your mind around, hey, I finished my last little bit of training on Wednesday or Tuesday, and I have a comp coming up on Saturday or Sunday. It makes sense that I only have a couple of days off and I'm jumping into the meet. It's a little bit easier to wrap your mind around it because you had the last exposure close enough to feel confident about where you're opening at and the weights you're taking and the game plan you're making. The challenge for you is you had to do the reverse. You had to take a significant load off the bar about 10 days out from the meet, and you had to ramp back up as fast as possible
Sure.
so that you could feel comfortable taking those openers. So it's a very different style taper. And it seems like by all measure, it actually worked really well. And one of the questions I was going to ask you, do you think that that might change the way that you taper in the future?
Hit a decent number. So I finished my squat with 325, which the comp about a year ago, I did 327 and a half. Attempted more in November, but missed. So it's within a normal range, and I'm happy that we picked those numbers on the day. But if I had come into this comp uninjured, I would not have been very inspired by that. I think the circumstances are kind of what make that something I'm excited about. So I don't think I'll change anything about how I taper those lifts. I might, for me, it comes back to like root cause for the injury. Is there something I could have managed better on that end to prevent or avoid or something along those lines? Maybe yes, maybe no. I have some ideas, but we'll have to kind of see how this stuff plays out. Yeah. But I'll taper the kind of in the same style that I was intending to, but something I've been doing forever is really waiting until pretty much the last minute to make a game plan for the competition anyway. I wait until pretty much all the training is done, because look, it just doesn't take that long to build a competition plan, and I want to wait until I have all the available information. If I had, say, a month out, built my meet card, I had the numbers in mind that I hope to hit. There's still, the rest of the last training block still to do, but go ahead and you start forming this picture of where you're going to be. And then you get injured, and then you come in and it's still the reality that I came in and I did what I could do, and I squatted 325. And I think, considering the circumstances, that's about as good as it was going to get on that day. I did about as good as I could have done, considering the uncontrollable factors. Now, if I didn't have a whole lot of expectation, I go, hey, a week ago, I was thinking I wouldn't even do this competition. And now here I am, and I squatted, 2.5 kilos below my comeback best. I feel good about that. Whereas if I had the game plan a month out and I go, I'm going to squat 335, and then you come in, you only squat 325, all those same things are still true, but the framing around it is different. And then how I feel about it is different. I would rather have a positive experience. I mean, it's going to be the same outcome either way. And I would just rather feel good about what I did.
Well, and to add to
Absolutely.
that, it also can carry over to the other lifts, right? So it's like, like Matt Gary talks about this all the time of like, hey, you miss a squat and you're more likely to miss another lift. And he has data behind it. And, we're going to have him on the podcast in a few weeks to talk about some of that. But I think what it's the same way when you think about how you feel about your opening squat, how you feel about where you ended squat. It's difficult to shake off a mislift. It's difficult to shake off a bad experience like that and reorient in the moment. Thankfully, though, you had waited to the last minute, had the opportunity to put together that meet card, reframed your experience, and you had one of the masters of game day coaching there with you by your side. And I was going to ask you, what was it like having Sioux-z
awesome.
there helping you
with
work
her
through this
over the years, and we go back a long way. So she was always kind of in the picture as far as who's gonna be my handler. And then she gave me advice really similar to what you did in those initial stages. Initially it was like, hey, Susie, I don't think I'm going to do it. And then she says, okay, well, just take it a day at a time and see what happens. And, once we actually got into the competition setting, she could tell that I was nervous, especially on squats. So it was really helpful to have her, just chit-chatting, as a distraction. which was interesting subjectively, because it's like, if you're worried about something, if you're nervous about something, then someone distracting you from that does feel slightly uncomfortable, but it's for your benefit, And so like I could see what was going on, and so I'm just stay with it, and, we had a few, small conversations about this and that. And then I would be, 2 or 3 lifters out, and she'd kind of leave me alone at that point, which I thought was really expert handling on her part. Like I think when you're in your earlier stages, or you're working with somebody who you don't know very well, it's probably good to ask them and, have some conversations around expectations first. But since I've known Sioux-z, and since she has so much experience, like none of that even happened. She just kind of knew what was needed in that moment, and did it. And yeah, so she was, it was really helpful to have somebody experienced, even back in warm-ups, that I felt confident that, she had the timing worked out correctly, and she was taking care of all that stuff, and I didn't worry about any of that. And you take your last warm up, and she says, depth was good on that one. That's what you want to hear, and you want to hear it from somebody who you believe when they say that too. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, it sounds like it was an intentional strategy that she used to distract you from, because there's a fine line here, right? Of like, you want to be aware of, am I in pain when I do this?
Yeah.
And is it getting worse, better, or staying the same? And that needs to be something in your mind when you're hurt and you're trying to compete and you're trying to perform, to the limits of your human potential. You are going to be conscious of that. But the fine line is, you don't want to be overly focused on it either, because then you can almost sort of, self-fulfilling prophecy, make the pain worse. So it sounds like Sioux-z was consciously trying to engage with you, have a conversation, truly want to know where you're at with the pain, but she also like didn't want you overly focused on it, and she was distracting you with other conversation, other topics. I'm sure she was asking you about the family and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And like that's a really great intentional strategy.
The case, just because I had a lot of nerves on the squat, and that was something that's new. I would say is part of this little comeback that I'm doing here. I hadn't been terribly nervous for the first 2 competitions, but this one I was definitely nervous, and I'm not sure if it's that it was nationals or that I was, recently injured and nervous about that, or probably a combination of things, but had a lot of nerves to the point where I don't know. I don't think it would have been terribly obvious if you don't know me, but like people that knew me could definitely see it, So it was a good read, a good adjustment on her end. And, in my case, went out and did the opener, and that was fine. But the nerves usually go away after your opening squat. In this case, they did a little bit, but not that much. I was pretty nervous throughout the whole squatting section, and then after squats were over, then I felt a lot better.
Well, too, it's like I watched your opener and I watched your second attempt, and there was definitely some cautiousness in the walkout, cautiousness, like just because I know how you lift, and I could watch it, I could see your face, and like the over bracing, like you were talking about before on 135, I saw that on the opener that I wouldn't normally see, but that all made sense to me. Like I think anybody would have been a bit trepidatious to walk that out and take loads that could provoke a pain response. But what I thought was cool is I saw it on your face. You started to see that kind of melt in the background, and then you became more in the zone and more kind of excited for the experience. Definitely by the time you got to bench, like I didn't see any hesitation on your deadlift at all. I didn't really.
Sure.
Again,
it was definitely less.
You might have felt nervous, but it wasn't readable to me.
And it kind of worked out a little bit differently, just in general. So the style that I've adopted over the last year or so for the deadlift, with the kind of dropping down into really a squat position and then initiating the pull really from something close to that, I kind of pull the slack and pause for a second before I really start the deadlift, on kind of the last go. That always gives me a second to just kind of make sure that everything is right and in the right position. And in that moment, it kind of, well, yeah, okay, everything feels fine, so we can go, But I was still hesitant to, I would say, hit the gas, for the deadlifts. But it was less just general nervousness than we saw in the squat. The squat definitely had the most when it came to nerves, but
Yeah, definitely. And, you ended the day in a fantastic
right.
place. I'm sure that 10 days out, you never thought that you'd be placing second, taking a silver medal, and watching the press conference and everything. I thought that, first off, that was really cool. What a cool way to recap this stuff. The press conference that Powerlifting America did. I got to tell you that the production was really good on that. But it was so cool to hear you talk about that and talk about how you've learned a lot from being that junior lifter back in the day that took a silver medal and was disappointed. That story that you tell about how now, looking at it, how you were overjoyed. This is the only time that you can think of that
absolutely.
You've had a silver medal and been just so excited
different
from it.
Mindset going into the competition. It's more, I don't know, man. So we've had a lot of conversations, you and I, and this has come up a lot since I've started competing again. And it always goes back to the kind of philosophical question of why compete. And I think if you're going to compete, it is, especially if you're going to stuff like nationals, then there's a lot of reasons for people to go there, but actually competing is a valid reason to be there. And for me, that is a big part of it, So when it came time to deadlift, I was definitely more concerned with placing than I was with trying to hit a PR or a certain number or anything like that. We were going to do what we needed to for placement more than anything else. So, and I think it's fine to be focused on competing, but at the end of the day, you can only control what you can control. And if you lift well and you did everything within your ability and you place where you place, that's worth feeling good about, whether that's a gold medal position or a bronze medal position or anything, So I've tried to be serious about that mentality and really take it to heart. And maybe this was easier to do because of the situation that I was in, but I don't know. I mean, it's just like the bar speed on the warm-ups, you don't lift more just because you wish it to be true. You can only lift what you can lift. And if somebody lifts more, then that's the way it is, Is there something that you could have done? Were you skipping training sessions, or you didn't do half of your taper workouts and missed a weight because of that? Then yeah, I mean, maybe you should feel bad about that. But if you did what's within your control and you just haven't developed the strength yet, then you're just not there yet, and that's not something to carry like a burden. That's just how it goes.
Well, and you said another thing that resonated with me, right? So this conversation of you never know when you've lifted the heaviest you're ever going to lift. You don't know when.
Absolutely.
You don't know if this was your last silver medal opportunity, your last nationals. Life. I mean, I don't want to get too philosophical, and talk existential and stuff, but we truly don't know what tomorrow brings, and the opportunity to come back after several year hiatus from lifting, to be able to come back after this injury and really truly don't know if you could compete at all, to turning around in 10 days and taking a silver medal at your first nationals back against some incredibly stiff competition, amazing lifters. I mean, that is something to be proud of, and to be proud of the effort that you put in, the fact that you didn't quit, that you said, let me see what happens. And you reserve the right. I don't want people to leave and think oh, don't quit ever. Because quitting actually might have been the right decision. Your first goal is to stay healthy, but to reserve the right to make that decision, to wait for the available information to present to you and to say, okay, yes or no. And then also, how hard am I going to hit the gas?
Yeah.
You might have been able to hit the gas even harder on deadlift or squat, but was that the right decision in the moment? And to weigh that out, I think, is really important. So I have to say kudos to you for like hanging in there. And I've heard so many people say this. I know that people have reached out to you too to say it, but you also being open about this experience to talk about it. Like I was shocked that you shared that message, the private one of us on Instagram. I was like, oh, I can't believe Mike just shared that, because like, let's be honest, everybody wants the highlight reel. They all want that. Like that's what everybody portrays on social media. It's very few and far between that a high level lifter like yourself shares the tough moments like that, you know? And the funny thing is that we all experience it. So many of us are going to get dinged up. We're going to have these opportunities that things don't go the way that we want them to. And I just thought it was a really real, genuine, transparent moment. And I wish more people would do it. So I got to say also kudos to you for doing that and feeling comfortable to share that, because a lot of people resonated with that. A lot of people reached out to me personally to say, you know, that was a really cool moment that Mike did that. And that shows for me, you know, when I face adversity, I'm not the only one.
I think it's worth mentioning that I think me and probably anybody doesn't do as much of that as maybe we could. I know I've been kind of reluctant to do some of that in the past. And like even in this case, you know, get hurt 10 days or so out, you know, it's okay to not say anything for a couple days and kind of let that settle. But it was also a strategic decision too. You know, I thought, well, it would be better to be upfront about this than, you know, show up, underperform, and then be like, oh, it's because I was hurt. You know, so it was a little bit strategic in that way. But then, you know, talking about it after the comp has ended, you know, I did want to, you know, be a little bit, more transparent on, you know, what the experience was like going into it. I mean, I wish as much as anybody else that, you know, it was all good news all the time. It's just not how it goes, you know. I mean, the funny thing is too, like you see on occasion, like when people do talk about, like, I guess I would say like the reality of strength training, that past a certain point, progress is slow and it's hard fought and it takes a long time. You can still make good progress. It just takes a long time. And when you're honest and realistic about what those timelines are, it, like from a purely social media standpoint, it tends to do better. People kind of know what honesty is, and they've been beat to death with you know, add 50 pounds to your bench in 6 weeks programs, you know, that most people who are serious about this at all are just kind of desensitized to that kind of stuff. So taking a more honest approach to it is really better for everyone. It's better for the consumers. It's better for, you know, from a social media, from a marketing kind of standpoint, better from that angle too.
Absolutely. And I think it also gives permission to people to talk about that. And I think that your example also sets the stage for how one might approach a situation like this too, right? To say like, hey, if Mike Tuchscherer can have this happen, you know what? I'm not out yet. Let's see how things go. And that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about of it would be great if people shared more of those stories, because we hear, oh, my taper's going perfectly. Everything's going great. We hear that stuff. We don't ever hear the, I don't really know. And like you said, there's strategic decisions there. Like you don't want your competition to know. Right. I see all reasons for it, but maybe a post debrief to talk about those things. To be honest with you, we've heard Taylor Atwood talk about that, like when he's been banged up in the past. And that's important stuff, I think, because it doesn't always go the way you want it to. Sometimes you are waiting 48 hours out to determine if you can even compete. Sometimes you're in the warm-up room trying to make that decision. A perfect example of that is Mark Robb and some of the situations he shared before. He's in the warm-up room and he's like, no,
I'm going to
not today.
Tell Mark's
it's not worth it.
Story real quick, just because it's relevant and it's kind of the other side of this coin that I think is important to explore that too. But this would have been at Raw Nationals way back, maybe like 2012 or so. And I had been coaching Mark, and he had gotten pretty dinged up, was dealing with some pain stuff, and he was going to go ahead, push through and compete. And it was, you know, it was causing him some problems. And I don't remember it's been 11 years ago now. I don't remember exactly what the injuries and whatnot were, but it was enough that, he was there in the warm-up room. We were about to start warm-ups. He had already weighed in. And, he was still kind of hand-wringing about, I'm not sure if this is the right call. Maybe we should compete. Now, Mark is totally a type A guy. If he just thinks that the right answer, the right thing to do is to compete, then he's going to compete and he'll get injured. And that's just what it costs to do the right thing. He obviously has more sense than that, so like he's not attaching like that kind of moral worth to it. But I'm just saying, like, that's the kind of person that he is. So, he's trying to kind of wrestle with this idea of like, should I, in his mind, quit? Should I back out of this or not? And he told me the other day, he was kind of recounting the story, and he said that he remembered that like my dad was there, and my dad said to him that sometimes it takes more discipline to to withdraw, to do the thing you don't want to do. And when he kind of reframed it in that decision, when he reframed it in that way, he could tell that going ahead and competing right now is probably not the best thing. So he withdrew, and he's confident now that that was the right decision versus pushing ahead and competing, and then probably, in his case, ending up worse off.
Absolutely. And I think that that's a great illustration too, that it is okay to pull out of a meet. And sometimes that is the right decision for the long term, the long game, being able to sustain your effort in a sport, get stronger, not set yourself back. And I totally agree. And I've told that story so many times to lifters in situations like this. Just recently had a lifter who competed this past week where it wasn't that he was hurt, he was sick, and he lost almost like 2 weeks worth of training. And I was like, listen, we don't really know how this is going to go, but we're going to take all the available information and make the best decision. And it ended up going so much better than we were planning. But, that's the kind of thing that you sort of just don't know. And we think that we know. We like to predict that we know how the meet's going to go,
ironic,
the numbers that we're going to hit. But truly, you don't know until you
if you think about it. When things are going normally, and you hit your normal training peaking block, and you have your normal taper, and you go to the competition, things go as expected or worse. Like typically things don't go like way better than expected, in cases like that. But then if you're injured and you come in and everything is a mess, your expectations are quite low. It's much easier to exceed them, I guess. Yeah.
Well, it goes back to like just taking what's there, and I think that that's the common denominator between those two meets. Like we've talked about this before. I think the common denominator is just being honest with yourself the day of and taking what's there. And it is hard because you're an athlete, you're competitive, you want to push the numbers. Everybody, all of us do, or else we wouldn't do this thing. But it is really hard to definitely take that realistic assessment the day of.
Well, John, thanks for doing this with me. Thanks for helping me through the competition, and for being a sounding board for my training and whatnot, and helping me debrief these lessons after the fact. Thanks everybody for listening.
As always.